You're listening to Trail Mixed, an ecological show about art produced by the artist, pedestrian and writer Bram Thomas Arnold.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Dr. Bram Arnold has recently been commissioned by the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge University to develop a way of creatively enabling the attribution of non-instrumental value to the biodiversity of an ecosystem. He has also recently stood in a field with the community action group Wildlife Groundswell on the Lizard, with whom he completed a hedgerow importance test. This iteration of Trail Mixed will examine the basis of the rustle in the hedgerow and see what can be found there, underneath the serpentine and the dog mercury, the enclosures act, the encroachment of three-cornered leek and a foraged spring vinegar. Amidst asking just what is the value of a hedgerow, and how can citizen science lead us there? Just what is the value of biodiversity? And how can we hold on to that in these ecologically fragmenting times? So that's the description I wrote for what this radio show was going to be about. And basically, things change. So this week we're going to be listening to extracts from the Folklore of Plants, which is a compilation album released by Devon Folklore Tapes. We're going to be listening to Volume 1 and hearing some extracts from the liner notes as well. This is the second of 3 radio shows that are loosely framed under the title Towards Field Station. Objective 3. Instigate walking conversations with participants, including artists, scientists and community members, to generate a wide understanding of the transdisciplinary processes Field Station is activating. These conversations will contribute to a series of radio shows produced live in the field during the second phase of the fellowship alongside other forms of the data gathering. Walking conversations have been an element of Dr. Arnold's practice since 2012, and there is significant evidence from both the social sciences and arts practice-based research that they generate spaces for transdisciplinary understanding to emerge. change effect, expand, improve, change effect, work with, work toward, work toward, change effect, work toward, work toward, change effect, integrate, work toward.
So I'm here with my trusty assistant, Megan Adams, who is a forest school leader and works for the National Trust, but she's also my wife and my lockdown companion. And as she said earlier, we've already lost our dog. Ethel is out here somewhere supporting the venture. She's a small Jack Russell who's a bit excessively enthusiastic in high peak rabbit season. So she's already gone. She's not really helping anymore. So we're going to start this hedge and wall importance test. Please read the help note with each question. Although the questions are simple, the notes contain essential information. It is useful to take with you the local Ordnance Survey 1 to 25,000 map. The recording may be done from either side of the hedge as convenient. Walk quietly along the hedge at a distance of a few feet whilst filling in the form. Return along the same line pacing the distance for the final question, or take it from the map. Note that the term hedge includes hedgerow, hedgebank and dry stone or mortared wall in this case. As we earlier discovered when we had an incident where we'd failed to print out the hedgerow importance test, and I had several variations of a hedgerow test on my computer. There are lots of different schools of measuring the importance of a hedgerow apparently. This is just one of them. Gorse, Lux, Europaeus. I love you. The sun is warm. We can survive fire. Gorse thrives in hot, dry and salty climates. In Cornwall, gorse is an integral part of the coastal landscape. At the height of summer, when temperatures are high, the warmth of the sun causes the gorse flowers to explode, popping in the hedgerow, and scatter their seeds on the ground. The seeds need almost no nutrients to grow. They can even grow amongst roots incinerated by fire. Breathing new life from the debris of fire, the gorse is able to survive after total destruction. It is an immortal plant, bursting with the strength of life. Staying optimistic in darkest days, the gorse finds power for survival and continues its life. Its spiky leaves protect it, so the plant can be used for protection. Planting gorse around the house, using it as armour, the gorse will guard the home. In folklore, gorse is protective and is brought into the home to welcome spring in after long, dark winters. The gorse bush is in flower for most of the year. The succulent flowers are bright yellow, pretty and delicate. They contrast the dark green spiky branches they grow on. In summer, the flowers smell sweet and inviting, mild tropical scents mingling with salty air and winds from the sea. If you listen closely, you can sometimes hear the gentle popping of the seeds. And if, to be honest, it's a really hot and sunny day, you are going to hear the popping of the seeds. Gorse is hope-giving and symbolic of the fertility of springtime and new beginnings. There is a Cornish folk song, Go Cut Firs, that my partner and I made everyone sing at our wedding. Go cut firs, flames on the fuzzy bush. Go cut firs, fill up the foam. Go cut firs, flames on the fuzzy bush. Kissing's out of fashion when the fuzz is out of bloom. Kissing's out of fashion when the fuzz is out of bloom.
As I strolled down from Trafalgar, and I met, would you believe, the man with a golden tree. Go cut firs, flames on the fuzzy bush. Go cut firs, fill up the clone. Ethel, you are right in the way. And ate all of the puppy treat that I was going to give you afterwards. We'll have to go again. Go cut firs, flames on the fuzzy bush. Go cut firs, fill up the clone. Go cut fires, flames on the fuzzy bush, kissing's out of fashion when the fuzz is out of bloom. 'Twas one midsummer's eve as I strolled down to Trafalgar, and I met, would you believe, the man with a golden tree. Go cut fires, flames on the fuzzy bush, go cut fires, fill up the clome. Go cut fires, flames on the fuzzy bush, kissing's out of fashion when the fuzz is out of bloom. We went house to house for furs, when some grumpy old curmudgeon tried to dole us with a curse, so we rolled him into the sea. Go cut fires, flames on the fuzzy bush, go cut fires, fill up the clone.
The reason that sentence exists is because there are two types of gorse in Cornwall, one European and one native to Britain. And basically the gorse is never out of flower.
From Polrooney to Penally, and there upon the mark we set a wildfire flying.
These herbal extracts have all been taken from the liner notes to folklore tapes, is The Folklore of Plants, Volume 1. Devon Folklore Tapes is a record label that exists on Dartmoor and gathers folkloric and mythologic traditions in musical form, and I recommend you find them on Bandcamp or at your nearest record selling outlet. And so this week's show is kind of about hedgerows, the intersection of the wild and the natural and the human, the intersection of ownership and privacy, the Enclosures Act, management, fragility.
Our dog really has gone. Oh, did you? She's in the bush. Okay, she's in the hedge. Ethel! Here! Don't worry, I won't use that. Edit. Cut that. Oh my god, is she just at the top of the giant pile of poo? Everything in fluffy bits. Okay, so question 1. Proximity to town/village. Enter A for hedges within the town, including the main parts of villages. Enter B for urban fringe or village outskirts. For C and D, measure from edge of town or village. So,
we've probably walked, it's like we've walked maybe half a mile, a bit more, out of town.
Yeah, out of town.
We had a little detour at the allotment to pick some blackcurrants.
yeah. And we're on a footpath, which is registered. It's green on the OS map that we've brought with us, so it's definitely a footpath. So I think we're sort of half a mile, 1 mile from an urban area. So we're going to go with C there. What's intriguing is it's already slightly subjective. We're quite close to the urban fringe. We have sort of subjectively justified ourselves there a little.
Come all ye young and tender girls that flourish in your prime. Beware, beware, keep your garden fair. Let no man steal your time. Let no man steal your time. For when your time is past and gone, he'll care no more for you. And in the place your time was waste, spread all over through. He'll spread all over through. Woman is a branchy tree, and man's a clinging vine, and from her branches carelessly he'll take what he can find.
And the lizard
He'll take what he can
when you come to the lizard, there are about
find.
24 key species you want to find
He'll
which can't be
take
found.
what
Much like twitches
he
and birdwatchers,
can
you come to the lizard for those 24
find.
species. Yeah. So I think I found the next one. I'm going to try to find an interesting section in it. So if we pick up, this is, as I said, written, I suspect, by an Anglophile, and forgive me, John Wright, if you're listening to this. It's called The Natural History of the Hedgerow, and he has a chapter called The Cornish Hedge. I'll start there. So
This is the voice of Sir Ferrers Vivian of Trelowarren Estate in Cornwall, who in conversation last year stated wryly, with his tongue somewhere in his cheek, that one cannot care about the landscape unless one owns it. So rather than narrowly interpret this as an assertion of title, Trelowarren is a 700-year-old family estate, I instead want to suggest that to own can mean to understand, to know, to care for, a form of ownership that exists beyond notions of quantification, monetization, or exchange. Field Station, the project that these radio shows and this research is working towards, aims to generate transferable and transdisciplinary methods of citizen science and creative arts practice that enable small landowners and members of the wider local community to generate a sense of ownership in the decision-making processes going on around them in the landscape, not through possession of acreage or title, but through understanding and humility in relation to the needs of their cohabitants, the flora and fauna of the more than human ecology on the Lizard, one of Britain's most unique, outstanding and oft misunderstood geologic and natural habitats.
Ferrers Vivian from Trelowarren. Yeah. A Cornishman once told me that such hedges of Devonish provenance were degenerate affairs and poor things indeed. However, in the Green and North Cornwall there are turf-faced hedges, and I doubt these are reviewed with a derisive eye by hedgers in Devon. As a teenage on a touring holiday near Foy, ho-ho, I was puzzled by the dangerously narrow country roads which seemed to have been cut out of bedrock. Why would anyone bother to dig out mile upon mile of rock to make a road when there was clearly not the slightest need to do so? But of course I'd been driven in a fog of ignorance between stone hedges and not along a gully. In fact, the stone of Cornish hedges is often hidden by the vegetation that it supports. Perhaps the plants had threatened to narrow the roads out of existence and had been cut back by the council. To see them in their naked glory, one must be either lucky to travel to West Penwith at the tip of Cornwall, where few hedges support much vegetation. Well, you and I might counter that. As with the turf bank of the Devon hedge, it is the stone-faced bank of the Cornish equivalent that is considered to be a hedge, not what grows on top of it. Should anyone refer to them as walls in Cornwall, the error of their ways will be politely but firmly pointed out. Use the word hedgerow will also mark you down as a know-nothing outsider. To be on the safe side, you should call everything a hedge, even if it is obviously just a stone wall. If you are wrong, then at least it will look as if you're making an effort. Cornish hedges are ancient structures, with some walls dated to the Iron Age, showing signs of having been filled with earth and thus qualifying as a Cornish hedge. If properly constructed, they can attain a great age without the necessity of being rebuilt. Cornish hedges seem to belong in the landscape. They seem to be the landscape. Unfortunately, some are now being built without the benefit of what has been learnt over the centuries and have been known to collapse within 6 months. Cornish hedges are constructed in much the same way as turf banks hedges of Devon, but there is considerable variation in the laying of the stonework. Although I must have passed many more that were concealed beneath vegetation, I found 3 styles in as many hours on the drive round Cornwall, and they were all quite beautiful. As with stone walls, it is the availability of materials, tradition and personal quirks of the craftsman that dictate the design details of a Cornish hedge. One was constructed out of large rectangular stones laid like a vertical cobblestone road, another from thin sedimentary rocks horizontally laid and capped with a herringbone flourish, Jack and Jill style as it is known. The third, which I fancy to be quite rare, was made of very thin stones orientated vertically. Cornish hedges are made, among other things, from granite, shale, quartz from mining operations and slate. The dimensions of a Cornish hedge are similar to those of their Devon counterparts. The width of the base should be around 1500 millimetres, the width of the top about 750 millimetres, and the height about 1500 millimetres. Such a wall will support small plants and hawthorn, though not generally a standard tree. If standard trees are to be planted, then the width of the base and the top is increased by 1 metre. There is both artistry and science in the building of these walls. The sides are not straight slopes but curve upwards, first gently, then more steeply, until they are vertical or even leaning slightly outwards near the top. Anyone with an eye for such things can see that it is perfect curve required for stability. A straight-sided facing would bulge out from the weight of the soil pressing down from above. So important is this curve that hedges use carefully crafted forms to ensure consistency, and the curve even has a name, the batter. Hedges are laid on subsoil, which in Cornwall is usually reached by digging a trench of about 6 or 8 inches. Fairly massive stones called grounders are laid and made level with fillers, thus providing a flat surface on which the next row of stones can be neatly laid. As each row is added, the hedge is filled with soil that is packed down very firmly. There must be no organic matter in the soil, as this will not rot and partially hollow out the hedge. The soils have used suitably rural-sounding names, Rab, Growan and Shillet, Rab, I am told, being the best. All stones should be laid with a short edge facing outwards. This uses a great deal more stone than having a long edge facing outwards, but makes for a much stronger hedge. Despite this, there are no through stones, single stones running from front to back, as are often found in dry stone walls. Some Cornish hedges, especially near gateways, incorporate stones of enormous size which require the services of a digger or tripod frame to move into position. It is a tribute to the skill of the hedgers that these monster rocks are invariably incorporated so neatly. The hedge is finished by mounding up soil on the top, and above this, pegging down 2 rows of tobs, one on each side of the top of the hedge. A tob is a 6-inch thick turf that has been saved from the original clearance of the site. This ensures that the plants growing on the hedge will be local to it. It is pegged with bits of twig and branch, and the gaps between the tobs are filled with soil. And that, for the moment, is the hedge complete. 5,000 years ago they moved those big stones, but they seem to have moved the big stones before a digger and a tripod. Yeah, sure.
This is an extract taken from a paper co-written with Dr. Lauren Holt from the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge University. Language is everything about how we construct our thoughts and construct our worlds. And language is built on a structure of letters, grammar, syntax, and fluid definition. Such formations can be applied to biodiversity and how it functions in the same capacity to the planet. Without language, I would not be stumbling through these words to you now, and without biodiversity, the world would not have arrived at trees, or gorse bushes, hedgerows, or wrens, or mycelium, or crows, pangolins, or us. You need redundancy in an ecological sphere in the same way you need space in a language. Something to thrive when something struggles, a moment to breathe whilst others speak. Something to live when something else dies, the seeming purposelessness of space in a sentence is what gives meaning to mouths. Biodiversity is to the world what language is to humanity. Language is the foundational strata upon which all forms of civilization are built. Such is biodiversity to the planet. So how can we account for this outside of our economic lens? And I am trying to escape talking about value, but I keep getting sucked back into its traps. They are everywhere in how we construct sentences in Western society. Use, value, worth, profit, product, cost, loss. All these signifiers, all these constructs we have created. Out here, this stuff is just growing. It's just summer. It's a hedgerow under the desperate gush of sunlight. It is all just growing, breeding, seeding, blooming, bursting, just being. But none of those things, those financial constructs, matter to it. And yet, alas, they do matter, because we can make them. Because we can, by eliminating an intrinsic value within ecological systems and biological abundance, take it from them. And by taking the value from them, we can give it to ourselves. The things we lose first when we talk about economic value are emotion, and care, and consideration, and conviviality and companionship. None of these things equate very well to the monetary economy. But I care about this hedgerow. I care that it exists, and that I can come here in the morning and see a woodcock and 4 song thrushes in a nest just before they fledge. And now her nest is empty. I wonder whether she'll use it again, or whether she rebuilds. And I love that I do not know, may never know. And there is a question here about the relationship between knowledge and care. How can you care for something if you do not know about it?
Okay, so the distant view from the hedge. If you have answered A to question 1, enter N in the box for questions 2, 3 and 4 and go to question 5. Otherwise, divide the all-round view into 4 equal quadrants. A simple method of viewing one quadrant is to hold out arms at right angles, one arm out sideways and one pointing ahead, and look for the horizon land between hands. Look at each quadrant in turn. What is the furthest view that can be seen for the whole of quadrant of one quadrant?
Like, that right angle's there.
That's the right angle. That's okay. I never was very good at maths.
Oh, so we can see all the way to the sea from here.
Yeah.
So we can see across Pool and over towards the North Cliffs and then beyond to the sea.
Yeah, and then the horizon of the sea is probably very far away.
Yeah, so it's obviously a clear day.
Yeah. But we think it's about 4 miles to the coast from here.
Yeah.
So the horizon of the land is 4 miles away in that quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
looking north from here, no, south actually, the other way, there's a buzzard and a man.
So the furthest we can see is probably, what, 50 metres?
Yeah, 50 to 100 metres, some of those trees.
Those trees, yeah.
And then this way, again we can see across the field to a far tree.
Another 2 fields.
Yeah, 200 metres.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Last
this
quadrant
last quadrant.
is mainly obscured by a large ash tree.
Yeah, in the hedgerow.
So last week I interviewed and had a chat with Professor Caitlin De Silvi from Exeter University, and this is a quote from her book, Curated Decay, Heritage Beyond Saving. When I was carrying out my doctoral fieldwork, I spent an afternoon with the curator at the Grant Cause Ranch, a property in Montana, now managed by the National Park Service. During my visit, the curator showed me some of her field collections. The items in her care included tin cans full of nails, mismatched horseshoes, unidentifiable metal parts, stray hardware, lengths of rope, and other mundane objects associated with late 19th and 20th century farming and ranching practice. I asked the curator how the public valued these collections, given that the material they contained would seem unremarkable to anyone who had spent time in rural American West. Her answer was instructive. The thing that seems to make people respect it more is the better it's taken care of. If it's all in a heap, they consider it trash, but if you single it out and put it in a little tray and pad it and look like you're trying to take care of it, it seems to have more value in people's eyes. The curator's comment aligns neatly with an observation made by Cornelius Holtorf and Oscar Ortmann. We prefer a past that is fragile, cannot be replaced, and needs our help. One might even say that archaeological sites are not being saved because they are valued, but rather they are valued because they are being saved. The preservation paradigm that guides most contemporary heritage practices singles out certain features, puts them in various equivalents of the little padded tray, and makes it look like we're trying to take care of them. In this sense, the act of extending care actually produces value, although it is often presented as a response to the inherent value of the threatened object or structure.
Yeah.
So what's about to happen is we're going to go for a walk together through a hedgerow importance test. We're going to have a conversation with Sir Ferrers Vivian, who is the Lord of the Manor at Trelawarren Estate on the Lizard in Cornwall. It's a family estate that's been in the same hands for 700 years. He's going to read us some stories from some books in his library. In between that, you're going to join me and my wife and my dog doing a hedgerow importance test on a footpath near my house.
Yeah, it's very much a Cornish hedge. So I don't really know. I think one of the things sometimes about Cornish hedges, they were built up out of the stone and they're made to make the hedge. So I don't know whether the hedges lower on the side. Sometimes they've broken out and they've built the hedge inside.
So one of the things I've been undertaking as a research method is the notion of bibliomancy. Bibliomancy, as its name suggests, has a biblical and spiritual origin. It is the notion of picking up a book and selecting at random a passage from it and trying to find the relevance or predict the future in relation to your situation from that passage. So here's some outcomes of bibliomancy, which is related to intuition and serendipity and coincidence, which I think are intriguing methods and processes that artists very regularly employ in their practice. A faith in the uncertainty of something, following your nose.
Ye once were gay, when nature's bibliomancy is hard. It's encountering something you've only just encountered and reading it aloud for the first time. Ye injured fields, ye once were gay, when nature's hand displayed long waving rows of willows grey, and clumps of hawthorn shade, but now, alas, your hawthorn bowers, all desolate we see. The spoiler's axe their shade devours, and cuts down every tree. Not trees alone have owned their force, whole woods beneath them bowed, they turned the winding rivulet's course, and all thy pastures ploughed. John Clare is the only poet to describe the ragged, solitary heaths of England, though there is also Hardy's famous prose description of Egdon Heath in Dorset. But what is even more remarkable is the entire absence of any poetry associated with the open fields, any lament in literature for their passing. There is indeed plenty in print about them, but it is economic, argumentative stuff, mostly condemnatory, and lacking in any understanding of what this old world meant to the peasant, and of what he lost by its passing. Perhaps it is not remarkable after all that no poet should have described this world to us before it expired, described it in language that would bring home to us what kind of world it actually was and how its inhabitants looked upon it. For it was above all a peasant world, and the peasant was inarticulate. John Clare was the great exception, an articulate peasant, and he might have described that world for us in all its natural beauty and its deep associations for the human race. 12 or 13 centuries of unbroken continuity. But he came almost too late for this kind of England. By the time he began writing, about the time of Waterloo, the open fields had nearly disappeared. In his own parish, the changes had begun immediately after the passing of the Act in 1809, while Clare was still a mooning youth. It is true that there were still considerable patches of open field left in some parts of the country, at Castor, which adjoined Helpston on the south. The fields remained open until 1898, but the Helpston fields had all been enclosed by 1820. One must have been born and have worked all one's life in such a landscape to understand its secret life, to be able to feel its poetry and to express it. The English peasantry threw up only one John Clare, and he was born too late to experience this ancient world to the full. He saw only its remnants in the unclosed heaths. The result is that we know nothing about it except its external face, how its economy worked. And that has mostly been described by unsympathetic observers. Of what it felt like to live in such a world, we are and must forever remain entirely ignorant. Now that to me is an incredibly powerful argument for why diversity in the arts and the creative processes is of such importance. Diversity of class, race, gender, sexual disposition, orientation, gender orientation. A diversity of voices is required in order to keep track of all these various forms of living. Folklore,
and the folklore of plants and the hedgerows are the memorial traces of thousands of generations of people who couldn't write it down for you, didn't have the capacity or the access to paint it into a picture, to paint it into history. I fear coming out of this lockdown that we're on the cusp of, again, leaving the arts and leaving what the arts are to an incredibly small and entitled class of people. For what the arts are the rights to consider your life processes, how you exist in the world amongst the things you encounter in the world, and to not just accept what you've been told by your betters about how you exist in relation to that, but to devote some of your life to trying to figure it out, trying to put your perspective across, trying to ensure that alternative voices matter in how these things are said. The poor man, who is monarch of but one enclosed acre, will receive more profit from it than from his share of many acres in common with others. Written by the assiduous 17th century observer Thomas Fuller. Quoted in Owning the Earth by Andrew Linklater.
So tree species. So we actually get to look at the hedge now and engage with the hedge a little. Spend some time communing with the contents of the hedge. Okay, so tree species. Count the number of different tree species. Naming species is not needed, but use notes box if you like. Include any size of tree, sapling or coppice stool along the whole hedge length, even if laid or tightly trimmed. Count all tree species proper, oak or sycamore, and include smaller species such as hawthorn, elder, field maple, spindle, hazel, holly, but not blackthorn, gorse or any other woody shrubs which are not capable of making trees. If trees have been recently cut down, it should still be possible to determine the number of different kinds by examining the stumps and bark. Looking at species in nearby hedges helps.
So this is from Oliver Rackham's Illustrated Guide to the Countryside. In the 1970s, Max Hooper revived the scientific study of hedges. He is responsible for the famous rule that the number of tree and shrub species in a 30-yard length of hedge is equal to the age of the hedge in centuries. Hooper's rule may work for three possible reasons. 1. A hedge acquires further species as it gets older. Tree and shrub seeds brought by chance and birds germinate and occasionally get established. 2. In earlier times it was the custom to plant hedges with more species than later. Down to the 18th century, hedges were mixed from the start. Enclosure Act hedges were generally planted with one species only, usually hawthorn. Georgian enclosures usually planted hedgerow trees. After the felling of the original trees, the regrowth of the stumps gave the hedge a second species. Victorian enclosures often omitted the trees. 3. The older a hedge, the more likely it is to be natural rather than planted, and therefore to be mixed from the start.
Another hawthorn. Another hawthorn.
Another hawthorn. Another hawthorn. And another
There's
one.
no saplings or siblings or little... Are there any baby oaks anywhere? I mean, I feel like I've maybe seen that occasionally.
Other side of the hedge, we've got lots of hazel, but we're not looking at that right now.
Yeah, I'm doing this side, so we've got another hawthorn. And another hawthorn. And then a sort of tiny stumpy hawthorn.
Maybe the horses have had a nibble.
Yeah, well, it's definitely got a big old bowl in it. So it used to be much bigger. Been hacked back.
Here we've got a couple of rogue sycamores.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting there's no hazel over here at all. It hasn't migrated. But look, here's a little sapling oak.
Oh yes, that's nice.
Yeah.
Where's the nearest oak tree?
Don't know. I've always thought there's one on that side, but...
Objective 4. Draw together documentation including audio recording, photography and written journals, alongside the data collection and creative outputs from the field station. Present this work in an exhibition and publication in 2022. Downy birch, silver birch, blackthorn, broom, buckthorn, wild cherry, dogwood, elder, English elm, wych elm, wild plum, black poplar, black wild privet, dog rose, field rose, rowan, spindle, sycamore, wayfaring tree, grey willow, goat willow, elm, gorse, western gorse, European gorse, gilder rose,
Hawthorn, Crataegus monogyna, Queen of the May. Hawthorn, commonly known as May when in flower, is considered magical, ominous, or holy throughout Europe. There is a widespread and enduring belief in the British Isles that it is unlucky to bring hawthorn into a house. It was thought that evil or sometimes even death might follow. There were taboo-breaking rituals to counter this, in which hawthorn became a warding plant, bringing good fortune or negating witches' spells. In the Welsh borders, a cross of hawthorn might be hung over a house or stable doors on May Day. In Staffordshire, a bunch of may placed in the rafters by someone not of the household was thought to ward off lightning. In Ireland, a sprig worn in the hat would serve a similar purpose. Although associated with witches in England and Central Europe, hawthorn was more commonly thought of as the abode of fairies in Ireland. Right up to the present day, a powerful belief in bad luck attending those that cut down or even trim hawthorn has led road, rail and construction projects to be delayed, diverted and adapted to accommodate trees. Fairies were transformed to saints by the church, and some Irish thorns became mass trees associated with a particular saint.
God knows how they did it 300, 500, 1,000 years ago. And how they dressed them. We once, somebody drove into what we call the Restoration Gates, which are these sort of 1660 big ornate gate piers made out of granite. And the top piece fell off, and the granite ball broke off it. And it was a real tragedy. They were put up for the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. And I didn't know what to do, but I disassembled the whole, and I found that it was all segmented. And the ball piece was a 3/4 spherical ball with a granite insert, all as one piece of granite, which would slot into the hole. And it was so many different angles and then a sphere. I thought, Christ, it was going to cost me a fortune to have that rebuilt. And somebody told somebody else, and somebody told somebody else, and I ended up at Constantine, where there used to be several granite quarries in Constantine, Bizane and various other ones. And there was this guy called Mr. Dangler, and he was about 84. And he came out with a pencil and a piece of cardboard, and he cut a template of the sphere, and he cut a template of the square piece which was attached to the sphere, all as one piece of granite, and just had them as bits of template. And he said, "Have you got an old gatepost, broken gatepost anywhere?" And I said I had. He said, "Well, if you just cut it in half and bring it over to Constantine, I'll have a go." And he did it all with a chisel in a week. Really? And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm delighted to do that. A few pints of beer in the pub." And it just slotted into the top of those great piers as a complete reconstruction. Thank God for that. Yeah, amazing.
Gather hawthorn flowers near the May full moon. Pick flowers with pink at their centre. Place in a clean jar and cover with brandy. Leave for 1 lunar cycle in a dark place, then strain. Gather dog rose, Isle wild rose, Rosa canina.
This is the voice of the artist and your local neighbourhood witch, Alex Goodman. She's an artist and printmaker who lives in a small cabin in a small forest called Pentiddy Community Woodland in Cornwall.
Gather petals or unopened buds near the full moon. Place in a clean jar, cover with brandy, and leave in a dark place for 1 lunar cycle, then strain. Gather 4 cups of linden blossom, 1½ cups of sugar, 1½ cups of water. Make a simple sugar syrup by heating the sugar and water together. Then when the sugar is dissolved, pour into a bowl and add the lime flowers. Stir and let sit, covered with muslin or silk under the full moon. In the morning, strain off the flowers. To make your tincture, mix 1 part rose, 1 part hawthorn, and 1 part linden. Half a teaspoon is to be taken 3 times a day, or before, during, or after experiences of anxiety, grief, or heartache. Not to be taken alongside any heart medicines.
So I think there's a bit of A and a bit of B to that. I don't think there's any giants or devils involved, but I'll check with the county archaeologist henceforth.
So when we finish coming to the end of this now, you obviously send this off, and it's used to decide if we could grub it out or not.
Yes. So there was definitely, when I did this down in the field on the lizard, I was anticipating that we would get to the end and there would be a lovely matrix that we could calculate ourselves, and therefore before we had our cups of tea, around the fire pit at the farm, it would feel like we'd finished something. Whereas actually you get to the end of this and it seems like you have to send it into someone who then does the fun calculation bit for you.
So you don't get to know that you've got a 9 out of 10 hedgerow?
No, not until... And then maybe it's a bit like coronavirus these days. They only tell you you've got a good one if you've got a good one.
Otherwise they just don't contact you?
Yeah, otherwise they just don't get in touch. They just come and grab out your hedge if it's not important. I don't know.
So the path. Running along a bank, a parapet that saves from the precipitous wood below the level road, there is a path. It serves children for looking down the long, smooth steep between the legs of the beach and you, to where a fallen tree checks the sight, while men and women content themselves with the road and what they see over the bank, and what the children tell, the path, winding like silver, trickles on, bordered and even invaded by thinnest moss that tries to cover roots and crumbling chalk, with gold, olive and emerald, but in vain. The children wear it. They have flattened the bank on top and silvered it between the moss with the current of their feet year after year. But the road is houseless and leads not to school. To see a child is rare there, and the eye has but the road, the wood that overhangs and underyawns it, and the path that looks as if it led onto some legendary or fancied place where men have wished to go and stay, till sudden it ends where the wood ends. So that's from his collected poems. I quite like that. There was something about Edward Thomas never being able to make a decision about which road to take, and I think that poem, which pushed him to enlist, was about making decisions. I think it was called Indecision or something like that. Thomas often writes about roads and where they're going or not going in the landscape, and the fact the road still exists. Whatever man has done, the road carries on doing its business, and it's been there for thousands of years.
So this is a piece of bibliomancy I undertook whilst tidying my studio, whilst procrastinating before making this show. So this is a sketchbook of mine from 2008 or 7, in which on the second page I wrote down 2 quotes from Off the Map by Jane Fitzgerald. From cradle to coffin. The most we collect from a hedgerow now is probably a few blackberries in autumn. Yet years ago, many farm labourers were given a length of hedge to manage and use. Hence the hedges were kept in good repair. In laying a hedge you could take out the firewood, coppice ash and hazel, cut lengths for tool handles and let a few mature trees grow for your old age, when they would provide a saleable timber, some wood to carve for furniture, for a grandchild's cradle, or your own coffin. Trail Mixed is produced by the artist, pedestrian and writer Bram Thomas Arnold. For more information, see www.bramthomasarnold.com.